So our speaker this morning is Debra Englander, and she's a New York-based writer, editor, and author coach. And she's written and ghosted several books, contributed articles to Poets and Writers, USA Today, Money Magazine, and other publications. She was manager of the Fortune Book and editorial director for business books at Wiley for nearly 17 years. And she is going to be speaking to us today about why you need a book coach. So Debra, why don't you go ahead and start and let me share my screen?
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. I love helping authors kind of bring their books to life. So that's what I hope I'll do here. And just, with the introduction, I spent my whole career in and around the book business. So I've certainly seen how it's changed. And probably 10 years ago, there was nothing called a book coach. So essentially it's akin maybe to a coach that people use at the gym, which means for some people, I am checking in to see how their writing is going. For other folks, it's much more directed towards how can they get their book out into the world, whether they're self-publishing or they're looking to find an agent or a publisher. So I spend a lot of time working with people on creating a book proposal, trying to figure out whether they should self-publish or try to find an agent. So let me give a little, the business has changed really dramatically, and both in some ways that's good because there are more opportunities for people to get their book out into the world, but it also means that much as we were just Zoom bombed, there's a lot of less than credible, less than reputable companies out there, and so you've got to be careful. But first, let's go to slide 2, so you get a sense of the landscape of the world of books. So more than 4 million books published in the US every year. For the last, that 1.7 million self-published books in 2018, and it's probably closer to 2 million. But here's the real kind of discouraging number. The average number of books that every author sells is 200. And many authors selling less than 1,000 during the first year. And that's a really low number, which means that, you think in terms of best-selling books, selling hundreds of thousands. And I know when authors report to me and say, I'll say, okay, according to BookScan, which is the kind of the Nielsen, the numbers of books sold in bookstores and on Amazon. And I'll say, oh, you sold 8 books last week. And inevitably people will say, oh no, did you leave off a 0? And I'm like, no, you really only sold 8. So it means that you've got to be really smart about publishing your book. But the good news is, compared to years ago when you either found a traditional publisher or you put away your manuscript in your drawer, or you kind of went to the back of the New York Times Book Review and you found a vanity press, there are actually more options these days. So slide 3. So the old days, big New York City publisher or an academic publisher. Perfect. Okay, so next we can actually, yes, we can stay right where we are now. So your options, 15, 20 years ago, find a traditional publisher, an academic publisher. Today, so you've got all the traditional publishers, the large conglomerates, as well as smaller ones around the country, something called hybrid, and then of course, self-publishing option. In addition, what's changed is it's no longer just publishing hardcover or paperback. Some books are ebook only, and audiobooks have gotten increasingly popular. So next slide, and I'll kind of walk you through. Perfect. Okay, so most people will say, hey, I want to be published by Wiley or McGraw-Hill or Simon & Schuster. Terrific. because there are some big advantages. You'd get an advance, and that could be from minimal, a couple of $1,000 to a six-figure advance. And all of that will depend on the content as well as your author platform. It means you've got the support of the publisher, and that's everything from editing, marketing support, a professional cover designer. The publisher will also look for sub-rights opportunities, and that could be translation, audio, film, TV. You still have a better chance of getting coverage in the media, and that's both print and online, if you're traditionally published. And you've got your best chance of distribution, Amazon, bricks and mortar retailers, specialty stores, and big box outlets. Next slide. But there are some disadvantages to traditional publishing. Most authors never earn any royalties, don't earn anything because they never earn out the initial advance. The publisher is in control of rights, so you're limited. You can't put out a workbook without getting approval of the publisher. You can't publish any other book that the publisher would see as competing with this one. You're giving up control, so usually the publisher has the final say on the title, on cover design, possibly even editorial content. And that's particularly true for first-time authors. If you've got a track record and you are a repeat author with a publisher, then you can negotiate so that you're not giving up everything, and you might say that there'll be mutual agreement on the title or on the cover design. In most cases, the largest publishers, the most well-known publishers, don't accept submissions from individual authors, which means you've got to have a literary agent to approach them. And that's a hard rule, so that, I have editor pals at these houses, and I'll say, hey, I've just read this great book. Here's the description. Will you take it from me? A publishing person, and the answer is usually no. And it's simply because they would be deluged with submissions, and their feeling is that a literary agent is acting as sort of a buffer and is evaluating the material, and so they will take submissions only from an agent. But you still have other options. We can go to the next slide. So hybrid publishing, sometimes called co-publishing. And I don't recommend this for novelists, but for some nonfiction authors, and particularly those who already have a means to sort of sell a book that is a specialty market, or if they're out speaking. So with a hybrid publisher, your book looks as if it came from a traditional publisher. So generally very high quality editorial, cover design, interior design, and the book is distributed. But it means that you're unlikely to get an advance, although your share of proceeds would be considerably higher than the royalties from a traditional book publisher. But it means that you either agree to a contractual purchase of a certain number of books, or you are paying for some degree of marketing or publicity services. And again, if somebody has very deep pockets and they really want to see their book published and they don't want to manage the self-publishing process, this might be a good option. And again, if somebody needs books because they have a series of regular speaking engagements and they're going to sell the books at the back of the room, then hybrid publishing is a good option. Finally, next slide, please. So self-publishing or independent publishing. And I really have to stress, when people hear self-publishing, it means they're doing it themselves. And that's absolutely, most of the time, not the case. Occasionally an author is comfortable doing the writing as well as the interior design, the cover design. But in most cases, authors who are self-publishing are assembling a team of people. an editor, copy editor, proofreader, cover designer, a publicist. So you are, by self-publishing, essentially you are overseeing, you are project managing the publication of your book. And the reason why you want to assemble a very professional team is you want your books to look as if they came from Random House or any other publisher. And this is crucial these days because most of the time people are buying your books online, which means they're just a click away from posting something negative about your book if, for example, there are typos. So I've had self-published authors who wince because the first review on Amazon is, hey, this was a great novel, but in the first 5 pages, there were 10 typos. And that's, that's just terrible. You don't want someone to see that. In another case, I went to a conference and someone said, here's my book. And the front cover was okay, not perfect. I turned over the cover. I wanted to see if there were endorsers or back cover copy. There was nothing on the back cover. I mean, completely just black, not even a barcode, an ISBN, or a price. And I said to the author, how are you going to sell this? Like, you don't have the information. And he said, oh, well, on Amazon, I just look at front covers. So I assumed so did everybody else. And it was a very expensive mistake because he actually had printed up a sizable number of books. Now, there are good reasons to self-publish. It's the fastest way to get your book to the marketplace, from, let's say, a proofread manuscript to being posted on Amazon. If you're adept and you've got good people helping you, yes, you can publish in 3 months. And this is great if you don't want to wait the 12 to 18 months that a traditional publisher schedules out. And of course, after you've paid for your team, any monies that you make are all yours. And that's a really key reason to self-publish. Also, particularly for first-time authors, and especially for novels, you're doing print on demand. So whether you're working with both Amazon, Ingram, or BookBaby, you're not sitting on a garage full of thousands of books. You are literally printing the book according to when people need it. So there are key reasons for self-publishing. And people have done it very successfully. I will say the question that I'm often asked, because I come from traditional publishing, is, well, so shouldn't I self-publish and then show an agent or show a publisher that I've sold, 200 books? Won't they take me on? That's really not the case. In the early days of self-publishing, particularly for fiction, when somebody was wildly successful, a traditional publisher thought, great, particularly in genre, say, horror or romance, let's take on this author. Today, the bar to go from self-publishing to finding a publisher is much higher. So a publisher is really looking for someone to have sold several thousand copies in the first 9 to 12 months before they would consider it. I don't want to say it never happens, but selling a couple of 100 copies as a self-published author is not automatically going to get you a traditional publisher or an agent. Next slide. So I really want to, just as we were, we were Zoom bombed, anyone who is on Facebook, who's on social media, who is an author, somehow people find you're an author. So I've gotten solicitations from people I don't know, and I try to ignore them. You really have to do your due diligence. Often authors are approached by XYZ publisher, and they're like, oh, hey, we want to publish your book. Most of the time, they are not what I call publishers. They are printers. So you really have to do your homework. And the easiest thing to do is Google a company or a person's name plus complaints. I mean, I encourage people to do it, my name and see what comes up. But chances are, if a company is not reputable, you will immediately see either complaints to a Better Business Bureau, or there are a number of editors who actually have columns where they will post, hey, this is a scam. So, before you sign on with anybody, do your homework. And likewise, even when you get references, to look at does someone have a website, particularly if it's a cover designer or someone who does editorial work, look at the website. If somebody gives you names of books that they've worked on, go on Amazon. Are the books there? But again, don't assume that just because someone emails you and expresses interest in your book, that the company is reputable. Because I've had, unfortunately, authors who have signed contracts and then tell me like, okay, I'm ready to move ahead with editing. I've got a publisher. And it turns out they don't have a publisher, or they've paid a sizable amount of money and it's a scam company. So it's unfortunate that I even have to say there are red flags, but really be careful. And the same thing, even for some so-called hybrid companies, they may not be the most reputable. So you've got to be careful. Next slide. Okay, so I know I don't want to spend a lot of time on literary agents because I know you're having an event later in the year, but literary agents can be terrific. I mean, really, really advantageous. So they're kind of the go-between, the middleman between authors and publishers. So an agent is a great advocate. And in addition to selling your book, which is the primary goal, they will provide feedback and editorial suggestions on both a book proposal as well as your manuscript. Most agents will submit your book to a range of publishers with the goal of getting the best one for you. Terrific scenario is when they actually hold an auction and can get you the highest offer. They will also sell other rights, whether it's foreign rights, audio rights, possibly arrange speaking engagements and publicity. Agents receive a commission on all revenue your book earns for as long as the book is in print. And so that would be, if you get a $10,000 advance, the agent is taking 15% of that $10,000. On your royalties that a publisher would pay you, the agent is also taking 15%. Occasionally, some agents will charge a 20% commission with regard to foreign rights, and that's usually because they are dealing with sub-agents in different countries, and the sub-agents are charging an agent the extra 5% commission. I would say agents, and again, it's doing your due diligence and trying to talk to people to find out their experience with the agents. What you'll do is, and you'll have a conversation and you'll have a gut reaction. Is this the right person? As with it, it's almost like, hiring a doctor or an attorney or a decorator for your house. Sometimes there's a great immediate vibe and you'll know this is the right agent for you. Other times, based on the agent's feedback to your material, maybe the agent is asking you to change direction, and this may not be the right match for you. We can go to the next slide. So how do you find a literary agent? Social media. Great place because agents will post what they're looking for. And again, whatever social media site that you like, you can look for query hashtags. One of my favorite, which works, I think, incredibly well, is if you've got a favorite book or another book in your genre, is to see if the authors mention their agents in the acknowledgements. If they do so, you can go to the agent website and you'll find out whether they're taking queries. But to me, what's good about that is you've got something to say in your query at the start of, hey, I just read this book, or I think you'll be interested in my book because it's complementary to your client's book on X. Of course, asking other authors for their recommendations, writers' conferences, and then there are a couple of books. There are some books on kind of, here's a list of literary agents. Those are fine, and there's a number of them, but I pointed to 2 particular, Poets and Writers' Complete Guide to Being a Writer and Writer's Digest Guide to Literary Agents. I have seen over the last year or so that some agents, rather than taking a percentage of your money, are asking for some monies up front. Sometimes a modest reading fee may be okay. Again, that you'll have to decide that. But some agents are actually saying, okay, I'd like to be paid an hourly rate or a flat fee to try and sell your book, and they won't take any monies from the publisher. Again, it's a newer model. I think some of the agents are choosing this model because they know how difficult the business is, and they're putting in a lot of time upfront to try and sell your book. It's just something to be aware of. And again, you've got to read your contract and understand all the terms with the agent. I think we've got another slide, I hope. So this is probably what I spend the bulk of my time working with folks on. Writing a book proposal can seem daunting. And for some people, it's like, oh, I've written the book, now I have to go back and write something else. But the way to look at it is they're almost completely different documents. The proposal is how you working with an agent or you on your own are actually going to sell your book. So it's a slightly different kind of a document. I mean, other than your actual sample chapters and maybe or chapter summaries, it's putting on your marketing hat. So for example, when you're writing a book proposal, it's generally written in the third person. And that's different. You know, even in a query, you may be talking first person. And I will tell you, you know, from having sat on the side of getting many, many proposals, someone can quickly skim the overview and understand what your book is about, and then they will immediately go to author platform and marketing plan. So unfortunately, that's it, particularly if you're looking for a traditional publisher, that's the most important part of the proposal, and that's what you've got to spend time on. And I will say that everybody has a platform and everybody can have a marketing plan, even when you say there's nobody out there. So case in point, I worked with an author on a nonfiction book, and she said, I have, you know, no platform at all. Like, I'm not on social media. And I said, well, we can solve that because you can immediately get on social media. You know, let's pick what's the least threatening. And, you know, she quickly went on LinkedIn, which meant that she could start promoting the book on LinkedIn. But, you know, I said, well, did you go to a large university? Of course she did. So kind of another bullet in the marketing plan was that she would see if she could speak at the alumni, you know, the local alumni chapter of her book. She could submit the book. I mean, every university in the alumni magazine has, you know, books recently published by our graduates. Now, it may just be, you know, title and brief description, but if you think how many people read an alumni magazine, it's a huge number. So that's something else to mention. In this case, the author worked for a large global company. And I said, well, do you think that, you know, you could find out whether your company would put even on their intranet that you had published a book? So she went to her manager, who went to his manager, and lo and behold, they were just delighted that there was an author. And they said, yes, we'll put it on the internet, but tell us what else we can do. We'd be happy to host a video of you. So you, even when you think, okay, I'm not out giving tons of presentations, you've got to start thinking, wait a second, who do I know who might be able to endorse the book? Or in my community, can I talk at a library? I think a library is a great talk because, and again, even if it's virtual, because a lot of people go to library talks, and the aim is, yes, you want to spread word about your book. So you don't know who is listening to you give a talk, who may in fact then go to order the book, but who is listening who might be part of a book group or might be part of an organization that would have you to speak. So bottom line is, don't be intimidated by what looks to be, a very hefty book proposal. If you want to try to get a traditional publisher, this is what you have to do. But almost everybody has some way to add bullets to the platform and marketing plan. The other thing I would add is read. When agents give instructions, please follow them. Some agents will say, I only want a query letter and I don't want the proposal unless I respond to your query letter. Other agents will say, query letter in your email and then submit proposal and sample chapters as 2 separate attachments. Do that. If that's how they want it, that's how you have to do it. If you don't follow instructions, agents are more likely, if you're not following instructions on how to submit to them, they're thinking that you may not be, following instructions from a publisher. So you want to start off on the right foot. Be extraordinarily patient. Some agents will say they will respond within 2 to 4 weeks. Some agents say it may take up to 3 months. I usually tell authors to try, if they've heard nothing after 6 weeks, to do an email. If they hear nothing, when you get to the 2-month site, 2-month time period, do another email. And then I usually say, that's it. You can be a little more proactive and write another email, but my feeling is around that 3 months, if you've heard nothing, chances are the agent isn't interested. I had a case where I helped someone find an agent, and nearly a year after, another agent came and it was a rejection. And said, I'm just now catching up, and I wanted to respond. Frankly, I think that's absurd. I mean, I know agents are very busy, but in my mind, 3 to 4 months should be the most time to spend. But what I usually suggest is, unless there is one agent that you are convinced is the right agent for you. Maybe because you've heard an agent speak at a writer's conference, or the agent has represented so many books in your genre that you think, I just must have this agent. I usually say do a multiple submission. And I will usually recommend 3 agents at a time. And the reason why I keep it down to that number is, I guess I'd like to be optimistic that within that 3-month period of time, one of them will respond. So you have a conversation and you're thinking, gee, this is pretty good. You can go back to the other 2 and say, hey, I've got another agent interested in representing me. Do you think you could take a look at the proposal in the next week, and can we have a conversation? Maybe you'll get a response, maybe you won't. I do know that some authors follow the more the merrier, and they feel really good about their proposal, and they'll send it out to 20, 30, 40 people at a time. I just think it makes it a little bit harder for you as the author if you suddenly get people interested, because then it's, are you going to spend the time talking to all the agents, trying to see which one is the right one for you? I will say most of the time, I hear very few agent-author relationships that go south quickly. So usually the agents have done their due diligence. If you've done your due diligence, talked to other authors, looked at some of the books, had a couple of conversations with an agent, and again, it could be, you have an initial brief conversation, you have another, hour or 2-hour conversation. Some agents will send you some written comments about the book. Well, you make a good, this is hopefully the start of a good relationship. Most agents are signing you for one book, so it's the book that you've submitted to them. Some agents have kind of a year with an out for either party with 30 days notice. So, and sometimes the agent agreement will lapse if the agent is unable to sell your book. So, what some authors are doing is they're working with an agent. The agent is submitting it. Most agents will have kind of a first tier submission. Maybe they submit your book to 10 publishers. Maybe that you don't get a yes. So then the agent tries another list. And obviously because of the waiting time to hear from publishers, that means you're still tied to this agent. If the agent is unable to sell your book, then you've got to decide, okay, am I going to move on to another project? Am I going to self-publish? Am I going to keep working with this particular agent? And that becomes really an individual decision. Have you had a good working relationship with this agent? I will remind you, though, that after an agent has sold your book, maybe the agent wants you to work on a completely different kind of book for your second book, perhaps because the publisher is interested in a natural follow-up, and maybe you want to write about something different. Even if you sever relationships with your agent, the agent who sold that whatever book will still receive the proceeds, his or her 15% of all revenues. So it's something to think about. You've got a very successful book, but maybe you feel you want to move on to another agent. Just be very cognizant that the new agent doesn't suddenly pick up the revenues from that first book. If you have an unpleasant situation with an agent, sorry, the agent who sold that book is still keeping the revenues. So it's just something to be aware of. Anyhow, I'm happy to answer questions on any of this. I suppose, I am not, believe me, I am very busy, so I'm not pitching for business, but I will just say, because it's sort of a newer thing, a book coach gets paid in a variety of ways. So you should be aware some people get paid on an hourly basis. Some people will get paid on a project. Sometimes I will do kind of a combination of where I work with somebody on an hourly basis to craft their proposal with them. And then I will get a one-time placement fee if I find an agent or if I find a publisher. And just, the reason why a lot of coaches will work with authors on a proposal and try to find them a home is that it's just me. I'm not set up, an agent usually has a full back office where they've got an accounting system, so they can keep track of revenues from around the world. Whereas I tend to work on project to project, and I try to focus on finding the best home for a particular book. But I'm happy to go into chat and answer any questions.